everyone, and welcome to this latest edition of Chats.EU. As you probably recall from our first episode, this is a series of interviews, of talks that we are organizing as Europe Direct Core platform, during which we discuss different themes of a European nature, themes which we feel are going to have a direct impact on the life of citizens. So the aim of these sessions is to really bring practical and tangible information to citizens about issues which are impacting or are going to impact their daily lives. And today, in particular, we're going to be discussing biodiversity and the idea of protecting and restoring biodiversity. And we have with us today someone who's very passionate about this topic and also very knowledgeable. This is Manya Russo from BirdLife. Thank you, Manya. Thank you for accepting our invitation. And maybe to start off, may I just ask you to introduce yourself a little bit and inform our viewers where you're coming from, essentially, and your work in this area.
Perfect. Thank you very much. Thank you for the invitation to be part of this. I'm very excited to be part of these conversations. So my name is Manya. I work for BirdLife Malta. My background has always been, primarily been within the field of conservation. So I've worked both in Malta and overseas, working within different conservation projects. When we talk about conservation, we're talking about projects that help to improve the status of different species and basically the addressing threats, for example, that certain species might face. Through using different techniques, different strategies. So it mixes up. What the very interesting part about conservation as a whole is that it merges both scientific research from a very kind of what we understand from scientific research, going out looking for data, analyzing it and finding patterns, to working closely with policy and stakeholders and people and society and different country contexts that impact these species. So that is a little bit about me. Right now, my current role is working as a project manager with BirdLife Malta within a seabird conservation project, looking to protect two species of birds, one which is found in Malta and one which is found overseas, two species of shearwater, which I will speak about maybe a little bit later as well.
Excellent, thank you so much. Just to start off, we hear about, we hear this word biodiversity and about the need to protect biodiversity, but essentially, what does the word mean? So when we say biodiversity, what does that include?
Yes, so biodiversity basically encompasses both the living and the non-living parts of the natural environment. So when you're talking about a very biodiverse area, you're talking about an area with many different species of plants and animals, and then the way, so that is essentially biodiversity. When you're looking at an ecosystem, it is how those species interact with the non-living parts of the environment, such as the soil, the water, the air. So when we talk about biodiversity, this is what we are referring to, really.
Okay, and we hear a lot about the need to protect biodiversity, but why is there so much emphasis on this? Why do we need to protect biodiversity in the first place?
Well, basically, I think, again, I could go on and on about the reasons why, but just to bring it down to basics, we are part of a system. Humans and society and the world is all inextricably linked to the natural world. So when you ask why we should protect it, it's because we depend on it so much. So if you're looking at it from a very selfish point of view, it is because of that. The human world cannot live without the natural world. We rely on it for our resources such as food, water. A lot of medical medicines, drugs come from the natural environment. So again, human health depends on it as well. We have a lot of resources. I can bet you that if you had to look around anywhere, probably within a household or within any industry, it still boils down to needing something out of the environment. So first of all, I feel that biodiversity is important because, again, we rely on it. We cannot live without it. It sustains the world. So that's primarily one. The second thing is that if you look at this from a very, I would say, economic or country point of view, half of the world's GDP comes from nature. So be it from agriculture, be it from tourism, from construction, almost any sector relies on it. So without it, we also have a big loss economically from a country point of view and for financial. Of course, we've got lots of people who depend on it as well. So without a healthy, for example, marine ecosystems, the livelihoods of many fishermen are at stake, and let's not only think about Malta. If you look abroad, if you look at places, for example, like Africa or Asia, there's a lot of parts of the world which depend solely and have no other means of income aside from fisheries. So when we think about affecting people's livelihood, where this is not just a matter of saying, oh, someone likes fishing and that's all they've known. No, in some places that is the only option. So there's the importance of protecting biodiversity for that reason as well, because it could lead to a lot of poverty, to a lot of malnourishment of many different parts of the world, of people in different parts of the world. And finally, as well, in a time where climate change is such a big problem and a big discussion, if we don't protect nature, we are making ourselves more vulnerable to climate change. There's a lot of services which nature and different ecosystems and biodiversity provide, which help to protect us from climate change. And the problem is that we are living in a world right now where we are not only removing or rather, we're not only releasing a lot of carbon into the air, which is a direct cause of climate change, but we're also removing those very things that would naturally remove that carbon, such as cutting down trees, such as removing big patches of seagrasses and mangrove forests. These are all important, what we call carbon sinks, because they absorb that. So again, just to wrap up what I'm saying, without nature, we also without protecting nature and biodiversity, we're also reducing our chances to be able to fight against climate change, which we ourselves have caused as human societies.
We're literally shooting ourselves in the foot, so basically.
That is exactly right, unfortunately, yes.
And I think most people, perhaps including myself, don't really make that immediate connection that, okay, most of us sort of value nature, we want to preserve nature, but I don't think we realize the direct dependence that we have upon nature.
Exactly. And I feel like this is something which, for example, I mention to people when people talk about food. Now, again, this is not me advocating for any kind of diet or anything like that, but we are very disconnected from where our food comes from. We don't know what happened, what is the process to put together, to have a filleted piece of something in a plastic container being put on a shelf at a supermarket. So the fact that there is this disconnect means that people don't understand the price that we are paying for having the luxury of having that food, but ultimately how our actions are directly impacting where that food is coming from. So that disconnect is one of the major problems. When people see something on their plate, they don't realize that nature is supporting that thing on your plate. So yeah, you're right. I think there's a bit of a disconnect there.
So probably this is also why there was the need to have this EU biodiversity strategy, right?
Exactly.
Huge challenges at the moment.
Exactly.
What do you think of the measures which are contained in this strategy? Do you think they're sort of adequate to address the drivers of biodiversity loss?
Well, I think that the strategy, so it's got two main facets, I would say. It looks at nature protection and then restoration of nature. All in all, I would say the strategy is very good. It's very ambitious. If we think that it's a strategy up to 2030, we're only looking for the next 9 years. So that to me already feels like there's a lot planned for a very short amount of time. I think that, yes, the major parts of the strategy are highlighting all the right things. So if I look at, for example, nature protection, it's really good that the strategy mentions an increase in the amount of protected areas. So the fact that there is an ambition or a target to increase the percentage of protected areas across Europe it's going to be beneficial. Of course, though, we have to understand what does that mean on a country-to-country basis? What does that mean in terms of how these areas are going to be managed? And then also, how are they going to be monitored? Because ultimately, we can only understand what impact or why we are protecting something when we see the result. What are we investing in, and what is actually coming out of that? Has an area increased in biodiversity and ergo increased the resources available to us? But that needs to be learned through monitoring, which again takes time. It's done over years. So and a big part of the strategy does mention this, that areas need to be properly managed and monitored and enforced as well. So, measures are not just put down on paper, management plans are not just written, but they're actually implemented and enforced, and then, like I said, long-term monitored. So this is a very crucial part of the strategy for Europe-wide. I will home in a little bit more on what this means for Malta later, but this I feel is an important part. So that's one. I think it also mentions it also mentions ecological corridors. So basically the idea that we don't look at a protected area as a unit in time and space, so what it is right now as a static unit, but rather as the ecosystem and habitats being very dynamic, and the fact that there are species that depend on multiple habitats and multiple countries. So it's important that we don't just look at, okay, we have protected an area, we've closed off a fence around it, and that's it. What other areas are related to this particular one that you are protecting in terms of the way that species move around? Or again, for example, migratory species, to protect them fully, you can't just protect where they nest, you have to protect where they feed, and vice versa. And that could be in 2 different countries.
Yes.
So there's a big challenge there to be able to preserve ecological corridors, because again, that means a lot of communication, partnerships, collaborations, transboundary between countries. So this is where I think the challenges arise, but it's good again that these are actually given priority right now. So looking at protected areas as a network rather than as single units of spaces.
And is this different from current strategies or current policies which are applicable?
Well, there is. So when you have for example, the Natura 2000 network is meant to be achieving that as well. So it does look at protected areas as being connected units. But this needs to be, especially in Malta, where we've got such a small space and it is so fragmented in terms of, you've got agriculture, you've got rural areas and urban areas, and everything is kind of like on top of each other in a hodgepodge. Do we fully understand where the connections are? Do we fully understand which areas need to be protected, and where could we potentially have corridors? And it could be literal corridors. In countries abroad, they have areas where you have a green area literally crossing a highway, either through tunnels. And why is this being done? So that species can move, so that animals can move from one place to the other without, having to close off the infrastructure completely. So I think, I think it is being done. But the fact that that is mentioned in the strategy, obviously there still is a lot more that can be done on this front.
So I don't know if you have more points in relation to protection, but I recall you said that the strategy has 2 facets: the protection and the restoration. I don't know if you want to say something about the restoration side of things. What does it mean, and what measures are in the strategy for biodiversity restoration?
Yes, exactly. Thank you for that. So so in fact, the restoration side of things. So one of the parts of restoration. So first of all, when we talk about restoration, we talk about, in a very basic terms, giving nature, it's two ways: giving nature a chance to bounce back, but also implementing strategies that help nature to come back.
Okay.
So, you know, if you have freshwater systems that with time have maybe become very low in oxygen, have become anoxic, for example, it is doing certain things to improve the quality of that freshwater system to bring back the original biodiversity in that system, for example. This is in very simple terms, but restoration is, again, a very important part of the strategy, that we're not giving up on areas that have become low in productivity, but we can bring them back. Because again, the science and the expertise does exist to do that. When you look at, for example, one part of the strategy mentions invasive species, for example. So species that inhabit an area and can actually cause more harm than good from them being around, from them being present, like invasive species of plants, which are very competitive. They're very strong, I would say, in very simple terms, plants, and they would take up space of other local species, giving them less of a chance that the local species survive in that area.
Okay.
So, yeah, so controlling invasive species is a very important part of restoration, which in Malta, for example, is something that we really, really do need to tackle. It's a big, ambitious part of the strategy, which I'll take it exactly as it is quoted within the strategy, is that there will be no deterioration to conservation status of all protected habitats and species by 2030. This is very, very ambitious. Why? Because a lot of species, unfortunately, are already towards a trajectory of deteriorating in their conservation status. So unless things are really fast-tracked and urgent and very prompt action is taken, this target would be very hard to achieve. And also, how do we select what needs to be protected and not? Again, a part of the strategy mentions that we will restoration, or rather protection, so I think it's kind of, it covers both, that the Commission will provide guidance to governments to be able to prioritize certain habitats and species. Now, this would be very interesting to see how it's rolled out, because even within the conservation community itself, there is a lot of debate on how do you prioritize? What do you pick? Do you pick something which is easy to fundraise for? So more money will come its way, so you go for that. Or do you look at a species which is low in numbers, but maybe is not particularly important, or maybe it's found in other parts of the world, so do you let that go? And of course, there needs to be prioritization, because there's so much and there's little funding and little efforts that can go into this. So you need to do this prioritization exercise. So I think that would be interesting to see how that is rolled out. And one more thing which I liked about the strategy as a whole, which is kind of an umbrella part of the strategy, is how incentives, or rather enablers for research, innovation, skills building within obviously society is a major part of this. So again, so this biodiversity strategy is not just targeted towards policymakers and scientists, but it's also looking at entrepreneurs that could come up with solutions, for example, to fight plastic pollution. This is a big part of it, because plastic is a threat. So incentivizing research and innovation to come up with solutions for these problems is a very important part. And I understand that funding is also being channeled in through different funds to be able to enable this, which I'm sure probably you're very familiar with as well, even through the skills building.
There's a lot, so there's a lot to familiarize ourselves with, and a lot of developments. But yes, some we are already familiar with, and we will also have sessions in the future where we will zoom in on these funding instruments. I'm going to sort of focus a little bit on Malta now. So we talked about the EU's biodiversity strategy, and now when it comes to applying it locally, which do you feel are the measures which are really crucial for Malta to be able to preserve and protect its own biodiversity?
Well, I mean, a lot of the parts of the strategy are very relevant to Malta. I'll just highlight a few. When it comes to, again, the increase of protected areas, there needs to be clear conservation objectives. So again, the idea is that you don't just kind of draw a circle around an area and just say, okay, this is a protected area. There needs to be proper management plans. There needs to be proper even capacity built in Malta to be able to have the right people to run it and to advise on it. So I think in Malta, what is very relevant is not just having the marine protected areas, but having them managed well, monitored well. Now, this is tricky here because some areas are actually managed by multiple entities, or rather there is overlap. So for example, you will have a protected area found in an area which is managed by both, let's say, an NGO or rather it is managed by an NGO, but is impacted by also the work that a local council might do.
Okay.
So this is something where, again, we can have protected areas and, okay, they can have great management plans, but are we ensuring that all the right people are on the table, sitting around the table to make decisions about this area? And is there communication between these two? If, let's say, a local council, and I'm saying this from experience, we work in areas where, for example, we rely on the local council to do, let's say, waste collection, because litter brings rats, which affects the species that we work on. If the local council is not collecting, or rather we ask, we need more collection of rubbish in this area, can you take care of that? Sometimes it's a matter of saying, oh, but this other entity is actually taking care of the garbage, of the rubbish collection. Okay, so talk to each other and implement. It's sometimes it's really a shame to see roadblocks being put up where they don't actually need to be there. It's just a matter of people talking to each other.
Yes.
But it's tricky. I understand fully the challenges that come with being a small country and trying to have protected areas where multiple actors use that area, be it the general public, be it people that their livelihoods depend on it, be it hobbyists, be it campers. It's very complicated. So if we want to achieve the targets in the strategy for protected areas in general, we need to make sure that we are getting all the right people together and that we are enabling that communication, and we are giving the remits are clearly defined within all these actors and how it's going to affect all the stakeholders that work or are within that area. So that's the first thing I would say. I think one of the biggest challenges for Malta is, for example, in the strategy, it mentions that there should be the strictest protection afforded to primary forests. Now, what does that mean for us? This means the protection of seagrass meadows. So basically the seaweed that everyone sees and considers it just to be a seaweed is a very, very important ecosystem. These Posidonia is the name of the actual plant, the seagrass, is a very important carbon sink. So it absorbs carbon. So reducing this means that we are less likely to, again, be able to fight climate change or reduce our net carbon output into the environment. But aside from that, it also helps to protect from floods. So these kind of act as natural buffers to protect the coastline from rising sea levels. So, but I feel that this is a big challenge. Why? Because out at sea, we have a lot of boat users. We have a lot of boat users that can be very irresponsible. So when we are protecting seagrasses, again, we have to consider that are people anchoring on these areas? Is unnecessary dredging happening where these seagrasses are found? So it's I believe it's going to be very challenging. It is a crucial part of the strategy that we must adopt. And it is, again, very strictly highlighted within the strategy that these Posidonia meadows or these seagrass meadows are protected. How that is going to be implemented is again, I think, a big challenge in itself, but it is crucial that we do it. So that's it, kind of directly answers your question.
Can I just ask you something
yes.
in relation to this? You mentioned the example of the boat users. To what extent do you think that they are aware of these negative impacts that they're having? So, because I would think that most people have no idea that they're causing.
And you're not wrong. I actually very recently, again, I don't mean to criticize any particular entity in any way, very directly, but I very recently did my boat license to be able to drive a boat, and I was very impressed at the fact that, let's say not anchoring on seagrasses was not mentioned. And I brought it up in the class saying, I think this should be highlighted to anyone doing their boat license. But then the problem is that you have, let's say, certain companies that that rent out self-drive boats, for example.
Yes.
So these people haven't even gone through the process of having a license, and they're taking boats out. And I've seen this happening. I mean, I've seen it physically in front of my very eyes happening, where you have maybe foreigners or Maltese, anyone it could be, that is really not familiar, and they just drop anchor anywhere and they drag it and they take a bunch of Posidonia with them, you know, or even sometimes, you know, people just not being aware of where is safe or is not safe to. So I think I agree with you. There is a lack of awareness there, and it needs to be highlighted a little bit more, I believe.
If you had to put forward some suggestions which you feel are crucial, both from a sort of local lens and also a broader European lens, to be able to see the strategy through more than anything?
Yes, so I think that for me, a big gap which I found, and again, maybe there are things which I've overlooked, because again, I'm not a policy, I would say, expert, so maybe there are other policies out there that support this. But I feel like a very important part of any biodiversity strategy is to look at industries such as, for example, tourism, which is having a direct impact on this. And so I would say strategies should also, or a future, I would say, policy should look at improving tourism, making it more sustainable in terms of its impact on the environment. I'm not talking about sustainability in numbers or in financial. I'm just saying, if you have tourists going to an area, and I think the most famous and obvious case is Comino.
I was going to say.
Yes, exactly. So if you've got people going to Comino, it is a protected area. And to me, it's
protected already.
Yes. So Comino is actually already an area that's afforded different levels of protection, but it baffles me how something as simple as waste collection is still not done well. The fact that there aren't quotas on the amounts of tourists that can go there daily, or boats that can go there daily. This is something that, for me, maybe it's there on paper, but it's not being enforced. I'm not sure. But again, it happens year after year. We all know it. I think as Maltese people who have lived here most of our lives, we've seen it getting worse with time. So that's, for me, so a key part of any biodiversity strategy is considering those industries that are going to overlap with biodiversity strategy. Because again, you can't protect biodiversity if you have a lot of human use in the area. Maybe it would be good that you'd have Comino having quotas. You can have times where it is inaccessible to anyone, so it's literally left in peace to be able to regenerate on its own. That could, you know, so there are many different things that could be done. So that's one thing. And finally, I would say that a suggestion which comes from a place of, again, wanting to see more results is which is mentioned in the strategy now, is that the Commission and the EU needs to incentivize governments more to implement the polluter pays principle.
Yes.
So having people being more harshly penalized if they are polluting, and this is both from a public and both from an industry company point of view. We can't have people getting away with indiscretions when it comes to the environment. It is a crucial thing that we need to protect. It's a crucial part of our future and the future of future generations and our children. So we could be the last generation that could actually do something about the problems that we are seeing now. So again, I feel sometimes like, even although these messages are logical and they're clear, they still don't reach the right ears, and it doesn't seem to stick in certain, heads of decision makers that have the power to do something, and it's just not. So in my mind, I think a suggestion I would have is, again, to implement stricter measures of penalizing offenders. Again, industries that are key polluters should be penalized through taxes, through any kind of other scheme, to make sure that they don't continue practices as they are doing it right now. And also transparency in discussions. There shouldn't be so much happening behind closed doors. Again, if there are developments or if there are operations which are happening that are going to impact the environment, this should be transparent as to why something is allowed to go ahead. Make information more public, or discuss this on a more of a public platform rather than behind closed doors. So this, to me, is, when you're looking at future EU policy, these are the things that I would like to see more highlighted. This crossover with industry, and this whole idea of pushing governments to penalize and to give harsher penalties for people who are offenders to these strategy targets.
A lot to
think about,
digest and process. Thank you so much. I mean, I really feel your passion with the work that you're doing, and all the knowledge that you are sharing. Thank you for your work. I really hope we'll have the opportunity to speak again, because I think there's a lot more to be said about this topic. I really hope that we start seeing some more positive change. I think the awareness has really started, and hopefully we'll start seeing some results in the coming months and years. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much. It was a pleasure talking to you. I do hope that the viewers managed to take, I would say, have a positive. How can I put this? But I really hope that viewers enjoyed the discussion, but also learned something from it. I'm sorry, I tripped over my words. I think I've been talking too much this morning already. But I do appreciate the opportunity. Thank you very much, and well done to providing this platform for people like myself and other people to discuss these really, really important issues. So thank you.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Manya. Enjoy the rest of your day. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you. Bye-bye.